There's a comforting version of sports history where safety rules show up the moment a sport realizes it's dangerous, and that version is fiction. Think about a batting helmet, a hockey helmet, or the titanium halo above the cockpit of a Formula One car. Every one of those looks obvious now, and every one of them arrived decades late. What actually happens is that a sport knows exactly how dangerous it is, often for decades, and keeps going anyway, because the danger is baked into the product and nobody wants to be the guy who ruins it. The rule only arrives when a sport can no longer look away. And here's the part that should bother you. It's almost never the first death that does it. It's the famous one. It happened on a baseball diamond in 1920, on an ice rink in Minnesota in 1968, in a boxing ring at Caesar's Palace, and on the last lap of the Daytona 500. The gap between when a sport learns something will kill people and when it actually acts gets measured in bodies, and once the rule finally exists, the sport does something strange with it. It sands the name off. Within a generation, the rule just sits in a rulebook next to 100 others, reading like common sense, like nobody had to die to put it there. So this is a video about the names still underneath. 6 of them. Start with baseball, and with the longest wait in this entire video. On August 16, 1920, Cleveland Indians shortstop Ray Chapman stepped into the batter's box at the Polo Grounds in New York against Yankees submarine pitcher Carl Mays. It was late in the afternoon, the light was going, and the ball had been in play long enough to pick up dirt and tobacco juice, which was normal in the dead ball era because teams used as few baseballs as they could get away with. Chapman never moved. Witnesses said the sound of the ball hitting his skull was loud enough that Mays fielded it, thinking it had come off the bat. Chapman died the next morning at a New York hospital, and he remains the only player in Major League history to be killed by an injury suffered in a game. Baseball reacted fast on one front. Umpires started swapping out dirty baseballs aggressively, which is a big reason a modern game goes through dozens of baseballs a night, and it's one of the quiet causes of the offensive explosion that followed. So the sport was perfectly willing to change something when the change was cheap. The helmet, on the other hand, was not cheap. Players thought it looked soft, teams didn't want to pay for the equipment, and executives worried about the optics of admitting the game could kill you. Major League Baseball did not require batting helmets until 1971. 51 years, and even then the rule was grandfathered, so anyone already in the league could keep going bareheaded, and the ear flap wasn't required for new players until 1983. Ray Chapman died in 1920, and the plastic helmet his death produced wasn't fully in place until Reagan's first term. Hockey took a similar road, and it left a loophole open for 29 years. Bill Masterton played center for the Minnesota North Stars during the NHL's first expansion season, and on January 13, 1968, in a game against the Oakland Seals, he took a clean check, went over backward, and hit the back of his bare head on the ice. Nearly everyone in the league played that way. He died 2 days later, and he's still the only NHL player to die as a direct result of injuries suffered in a game. The reaction was immediate and almost entirely verbal. Everyone agreed helmets were a good idea, and almost nobody put one on because hockey culture treated a helmet as an announcement that you were scared, and the sport's tolerance for looking scared was 0. It took the NHL 11 years to mandate them, and when the rule finally arrived in 1979, it applied only to players signing their first contract after June 1st of that year. Everyone already in the league was exempt. That loophole stayed open for a long time. The last man to skate in an NHL game bareheaded was Craig MacTavish, a 4-time Stanley Cup winner best known for his years with the Edmonton Oilers, and he retired after the 1997 season. Masterton died in January of 1968. The last barehead came off the ice 29 years later. The trophy the NHL hands out every year for perseverance and dedication is the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy, and I'd bet most people who have watched that trophy get awarded have no idea the man it's named for died on the ice. Boxing is the one exception here because boxing moved fast, and it's worth understanding why. On November 13, 1982, at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, lightweight champion Ray Mancini fought Duk-Koo Kim for the WBC title. It went 14 brutal rounds on national television before Mancini stopped him. Kim collapsed in the ring, underwent emergency brain surgery for a subdural hematoma, and died 4 days later. Within weeks, the WBC cut championship fights from 15 rounds down to 12. Medical requirements before and after fights got tightened, and the standing 8-count spread through the sport. Boxing, which had ignored a very long list of ring deaths before this one, restructured its signature event in about a month. The difference wasn't that Kim's death was worse than the others. The difference was that it happened live on CBS, in front of a national TV audience, in a title fight involving a popular American champion. Attention was the variable. The aftermath was awful in ways the rulebook can't record. Kim's mother died by suicide a few months later, and so did the referee Richard Green the following year. 15-round title fights had been the standard since the 19th century, and they have now been gone for more than 40 years. If you've only ever known 12, that number is Duck Koo Kim. The next one didn't happen in a game at all, and that turns out to matter. Corey Stringer was an all-pro right tackle for the Minnesota Vikings, and on July 31, 2001, he collapsed at training camp in Mankato, Minnesota in brutal heat. His core temperature was measured at 108.8 degrees Fahrenheit. He died early the next morning, the first NFL player ever to die of heat stroke. Here's what makes this case different from the others. Chapman, Masterton, and Kim all died in front of a paying audience, and the sport had to answer for it publicly. Stringer died on a practice field, in a setting football had always treated as private, doing something the sport had spent a century celebrating. Two-a-days in full pads in August weren't a hazard the NFL had failed to notice. They were the point. So the change didn't come from a commissioner having a moment of clarity. It came from years of litigation, and from Kelsey Stringer refusing to let it go. And it eventually produced heat acclimatization protocols, cold water immersion tubs on the sideline, ramp-up periods before full contact, and the Corey Stringer Institute, which now sets the standard for heat safety across American sports. Then the 2011 collective bargaining agreement effectively killed the two-a-day in full pads, and it got framed at the time as the players' union winning a labor concession. It was that. And it was also a rule with the name sanded off it. NASCAR needed 4 deaths, and I want to walk through them in order. Dale Earnhardt died on the last lap of the 2001 Daytona 500 at Daytona International Speedway, in a crash into the Turn 4 wall that looked survivable from a basilar skull fracture, which happens when the head keeps traveling forward and the body stops. NASCAR mandated head and neck restraints later that year, built a dedicated research and development center in Concord, North Carolina, and rolled out energy-absorbing, safer barriers at every track on the schedule. It's the most complete safety overhaul in the sport's history, and it happened in about 2 years. Now the part that nobody puts in the highlight package. In the 9 months before that Daytona 500, 3 other drivers died in NASCAR-sanctioned crashes. Adam Petty was killed in practice at New Hampshire Motor Speedway in May of 2000. Kenny Irwin Jr. died in July at the same track in the same corner. Tony Roper died in October at Texas Motor Speedway. All 3 were basilar skull fractures, and all 3 were the exact injury the Hans device had been designed to prevent, and that device already existed. It had been available for years. A handful of drivers were already wearing it, and it was optional because the sports culture treated a mandate as an insult to the driver's judgment. 3 men died of the same injury and the rule didn't come. The 4th was Dale Earnhardt. I don't think that's a moral failure by any one person at NASCAR. I think it's the clearest evidence in this whole video that sports don't respond to danger. They respond to attention, and the size of the funeral determines the size of the rule. Formula 1 tells the same story, with a name in it almost nobody remembers. Formula 1 had gone 12 years without a fatality at a race weekend before the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola in 1994, and the sport had convinced itself that the problem was solved. The cars were faster than ever, and drivers were walking away from enormous crashes, and there is no more dangerous belief in motorsport than the idea that you have already fixed it. On the Friday, Rubens Barrichello's Jordan launched off a curb at the Variante Bassa, and he survived a crash that should have killed him. On the Saturday, in qualifying, the front wing on Roland Ratzenberger's Simtek failed at the fastest part of the circuit, and the Austrian hit a concrete wall head-on and died at the track. On the Sunday, Ayrton Senna, 3-time world champion and the most famous driver alive, left the circuit at Tamburello in his Williams and died when a suspension component penetrated his helmet. What followed was the most aggressive safety program any sport has ever run. Cockpit sides were raised, wheel tethers were introduced, crash testing became severe, and circuits worldwide were redesigned, including Tamburello itself. Senna had a folded Austrian flag in his cockpit that afternoon, ready to raise for Ratzenberger if he won, and he had been organizing the drivers to push the sport on exactly this. Ratzenberger died first by about 18 hours. If you asked 100 casual Formula 1 fans what happened at Imola in 1994, I'd guess 95 of them could name Senna, and maybe 5 could name Ratzenberger. Same weekend, same problem, one surviving name. But there's one case that breaks the pattern, and it's recent. When Formula 1 introduced the Halo in 2018, that curved titanium bar arcing over the cockpit, the reaction was contempt. Drivers called it ugly, fans said it ruined the look of the car, and there were serious arguments that it violated the spirit of open cockpit racing. The sport did it anyway, over the objections, in advance of the crash everyone was picturing. Then, Romain Grosjean's car split in half and burned against the barrier at Bahrain in 2020, and he climbed out of the fire. Then, Zhu Guanyu went upside down and slid along the barriers at Silverstone in 2022. Nobody complains about the Halo now. That's what learning actually looks like, and I want to be honest that it took Jules Bianchi at Suzuka in 2014 and Justin Wilson in IndyCar at Pocono the year after to get there. So even the good example has names in it. The difference is that Formula 1 acted on the pattern rather than waiting for the next famous man to die. So here's where I land. Every rule in this video is a person, and every one of those rules now reads like it was common sense. The batting helmet is obvious. The hockey helmet is obvious. 12 rounds in boxing is also fairly obvious. Heat protocols are obvious. Head and neck restraints are obvious. Every single one of them was ridiculed as soft by somebody who thought the sport was being ruined. And every single one arrived late. That lateness was paid for in full by somebody with a name. Which means the rules people are laughing at right now are the ones worth paying attention to. Somewhere there's an argument going on right now about a piece of equipment that looks stupid, or a protocol that slows the game down, and somebody is calling it unnecessary. The only thing standing between that rule and the rulebook is the name we have.